So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kelsey Buckley. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement here at Island Readers and Writers, and I'm actually joining from our new office location in Southwest Harbor. So please forgive my completely blank background here. And I'm sure you are mostly familiar with Island Readers and Writers, or IRW, but we are a nonprofit organization based out of Southwest Harbor with a mission to inspire a love of reading and learning in children. So this program today is part of our 2022 online programming that we're calling IRW Presents. And IRW Presents is an online series that's bringing book talks, book clubs, presentations, interviews, workshops to teachers, librarians, parents, and all people who love children's books, wherever they may reside. So probably you fall into one of those categories. Also, today is International Women's Day, so we are so excited to be hosting this program, Herstories, Exploring Picture Book Biographies. IRW's Director of School Programs, Alison Johnson, is going to take us through the lives and accomplishments of rebellious, troublemaking, trailblazing women. And if you are not familiar with Alison, she oversees all aspects of IRW's school programs, including author and illustrator visits, recruiting new authors, collaborating with school partners to determine how our programs can best suit their needs. And she has also completed the Visual Thinking Strategies Advanced Practicum and the Voluntary Public Librarian Certification Program. Very impressive. So welcome, Alison. Thank you so much for putting together this program for us today on International Women's Day.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. As I noted earlier, I can't see you all, but I know you're here. And at the end, if we want to have time for discussion, I will stop sharing my camera and then I'll be able to see everyone. I have a pretty ambitious list of books for us to get through because I get pretty excited about picture books and I just couldn't stop myself from creating this list. So I'd like to first of all give a special thanks and shout out to Melissa Sweet, who is on the committee for the Ezra Jack Keats Award, which was announced today. But because she's on that committee, publishers and authors and illustrators submit their books to her. And for the past few years, this is the third year now, she has sent those books along to us for us to distribute to our partner schools, underserved schools in Washington County and on the islands. And so many of these books have come from that donation and will be going out to those schools, but it's a great way for us to preview them and share them with you. I wanted to also say that if you like what you see with any of these books, Kelsey's going to be providing some information in an email afterwards with a list of all the books that we are highlighting, so don't feel like you have to frantically write things down. But if there are any that you see, make note of that author and make note of that illustrator, because oftentimes they have more than one unless this is their debut. I believe that age ranges for books are all about our ability to engage our audience with them. Picture books are for everyone. Visual literacy happens with picture books, and we will talk a lot about that today. And I just don't think that anyone is too old for picture books. They provide us an opportunity to examine different artistic choices, as well as explore the balance of the stories and the words. So a little bit today, we're going to go through, I will take you through some highlights of all these books. We're going to talk a little bit about whole book approach elements. Whole book approach is a way of looking at picture books in their whole art form that was developed at the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art, and we've been partnering with them for 5 years, training people on that process. So I just wanted to let you know that that's a term in case you were like, what is this whole book approach? And part of that includes the anatomy of a book, Kelsey's also going to share kind of the breakdown where we talk about jacket, spine, cover, format, end papers, typography, design, medium and style, all those things. So when you hear those terms come across, that's where those come from. Okay, so first up on our list, we have Pura's Cuentos, How Pura Belpre Reshaped Libraries with Her Stories. And I actually have 2 books about her. Beautiful picture books. As you can see, this is just a wonderful cover. And we talk about jacket and cover, and we can look at, kind of get the whole thing on here. I can't quite fit everything. But one thing that's happening with picture books that maybe you know this already, but sometimes the jacket comes off and we have this cover that is different. So be sure to pay attention to that. Just a beautiful jacket and cover here for us to explore. And then we have these end papers that begin to tell us a story before we even have gotten to the book proper. So take note of what's happening here. You might see some things that are predictors going through the book. I can't read the whole book to you, so we're just going to make note of some highlights. So Pura came from Puerto Rico, and she went to the library and decided, oh, that looks really great. I want to be a librarian. Look what they're doing. They're putting books into the hands of children, and they are telling stories. And look at these wonderful illustrations here. We've got kind of this curved, image where we see all these books and you kind of feel like you're in the library. She was a storyteller, and she was also a rule breaker. So Pura is put in charge of story time. Here in the library, there are rules, even for storytellers. Light the candle, open the book, tell the story. But she didn't like that. She wanted to tell the stories from home. She was like, where are these stories of Puerto Rico that I'm so familiar with? So she kind of broke those rules, and she started telling stories where she was saying kikeriki and talking like the chickens and brum brum. So this is a great story for people who like to introduce sounds and get the kids saying those kind of things. And you'll see throughout the book we have this really great rooster that continually shows up. I also wanted to point out that there is often back matter in picture books that tell us more about how the author went about finding the information for this story. So you can really see there's a lot happening in the back matter of this picture book. And there's even more with a selected bibliography here. So that is our first one. And then we have another one, again, about Pura. This one that one was from 2021. This one came out a few years back. I think it was 2019, called Planting Stories, The Life of Librarian and Storyteller Pura Belpre. And again, we have this jacket. Beautiful, lovely jacket. And end papers, gorgeous end papers. Oh my goodness, if you take off that jacket, you have a surprise underneath. So make sure you pay attention. Before I did the training with Courtney Waring from the Carl Museum, I didn't know there were so many secrets inside of picture books. And I didn't know to look underneath the jacket to see what was on the cover. Now I do. So this is just another wonderfully illustrated book about Pura Belpre. And so she was from Puerto Rico and she came to New York. And so really throughout this whole conversation today, we are going to go around the world. So right now we've got these 2 places. So you could pair these 2 books in a conversation about who she was and thinking about libraries and storytelling. So I just wanted to highlight that there are 2 wonderful picture books. There's probably more about her, but these are the 2 that I have with me today. Moving along, and if you have really burning questions, Kelsey's going to monitor the chat and will stop me. But I'm going to try and get through all 23 of these books if I can. So next up in our female her story is Most clever girl, how Jane Austen discovered her voice. And you're going to see throughout these books today that it really is about trailblazers, and the theme of finding her voice repeats over and over. So again, we have a jacket, a wonderful jacket, and then we have underneath a different cover with these strawberries, which you will see throughout the book. Gorgeous, gorgeous end papers that give us a little bit of a peek into Jane's world. And I mean, even in this front matter, so front matter is everything that comes before the story proper, so where the actual story begins. So here we see those strawberries that we noted were on the cover. And we just have a really fun book about Jane, illustrated in these gorgeous soft tones. Jane loves stories, long ones, short ones, worn and new. And many of us have read many of her stories. And of course, we know that she had this wonderful childhood, this really warm family, lots of siblings, lots of creativity and courage. And she liked real stories. She was annoyed by the romance and the fluff. And this expression here just cracks me up. Because she's annoyed by the fashionable stuff that she was supposed to be reading and writing. And so these illustrators really bring the words to life in the picture books. She had trouble finding her voice. She knew that she wanted to write, and she spent a lot of time writing. And then they had to move. And there was the death of her father, which really caused her to go into a bit of a funk. So here's when they moved to Bath. It looks very different than her first home, which was surrounded by nature out in the country. Oh my gosh, look at that illustration. If anyone's ever been to Bath, England, it is just, this is a really good depiction of what it looks like. But when her father died, she really did go into a funk, and look at that. Like, you feel it. You feel the darkness, you feel her sadness, you feel the melancholy, and no words came. And she had many gray years. And so the illustrator has continued this idea of these gray years throughout. But as they found a new home, they went back to the country. I believe it was her brother. Jane's brother, Edward, couldn't bear to see his family suffer, so he gave them a cabin back in the country. And the illustrator is showing us how color is coming back into her life. And she begins to write, and she realizes that the stories she really needs to tell are those real stories, and those are the ones we know and enjoy so much. And again, there's really rich back matter with quotations that are throughout the book and about Jane. So really a gorgeous picture book about Jane Austen. Okay, next up, totally different, taking a different spin here. This is Sarah and the Big Wave. The true story of the first woman to surf mavericks. And all of these authors and illustrators are listed on the document you will get. And I love this. I love how we get the sensation of the height of the waves, of the movement of the ocean. This story is about Sarah, who was the first one to surf the Mavericks, which is a region where the surf breaks and these waves are just massive. So we're introduced to the story, of course, with this title page, which we've seen on the cover, giving us the idea of that height, right? I mean, this is a little bit different, but we're getting that same idea of height. We get this sense of movement on this page here, and this sense of her growing as she gets better and continues to pursue her passion of surfing. But you know, there weren't many females surfing, so she was breaking barriers, she was pushing those boundaries, she was breaking those ceilings. And here again is that sense of movement. She's gone down under a wave where she's gone under for 45 seconds and then she comes up for air, and you can just feel it, like you know exactly what's happening. The words and the illustrations are really pulling this together for us. And we talk about the anatomy of the book and different elements. And this is the gutter where the pages meet the binding. And this can be a very challenging place for many illustrators. But this sometimes creates an opportunity. And here, the illustrator, Sophie Dio, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, has brilliantly taken advantage of the gutter, showing us this wave and talking about the scale of them. 30, 40, even 40 feet tall with this building, right? So we get the idea of a 4-story building and this wave, and we're like, wow, that's a really big wave. She really, she couldn't compete because women weren't allowed, but she kept trying to get into these crowds of surfers, and eventually she found a group of friends. Fitting into a man's world, this is a theme throughout today. She's trying to fit into a wetsuit, but you know, it's too big, her surfboard's too wide. And so she really had to find people who would work with her to get her what she needed. Eventually she does. And here we have, like, look at this sense of size, right? Like, wow, she's paddling out to catch her wave. And there she is, this little tiny creature. So this perspective from above gives us that sense of vastness. And then we see her up close and we're getting the sense of her energy and the movement. She's paddled out, and even the framing of this is that wavy sense. So she's super excited. She's going to catch her wave. And then, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this all on here, but we talk about design of books. Here she is, she's surfing that wave. And magically we have this page that opens up, and it's just this massive, massive wave. So I know you can't quite get the whole sense of it, but it's just wonderfully done. And there is some back matter in this book as well, talking about surfing, dates, and when women came into the picture. And so a really fun book to explore surfing. Yeah. Now we're going to go down a different adventure. We're going to talk about paleontology and unearthing dinosaur bones, and take note of, like, the different artistic elements that are being used here. We have some who are using watercolors, some are using acrylic or gouache, some are computer generated. There's all different styles of illustration, and they all have wonderful aspects to them. So this is a dinosaur named Ruth, how Ruth Mason discovered fossils in her own backyard. So look at these end papers. There we have all the tools and equipment you might need if you were going to go dig fossils on a site, getting us thinking about what's going on in this book. Wonderful end papers, and even this introduction with the footprints here of the dinosaurs, bringing us into this. And really, for me, these picture books are a way of, I think we can use them for inquiry-based learning. They're springboards for conversations, for us to learn more, to go down different paths. And this one certainly did that for me. Talk about persistence. Ruth was just a very curious girl. She always asked lots of questions, was really interested in dinosaurs. She was a tree climber, had a wild imagination, and she started to dig in her backyard. She discovered these clues to what was happening. And so she started collecting bones and piecing them together and wondering about them. Paleontology wasn't really a thing yet. It was just coming to be. So there were dinosaur experts, but they didn't respond to her. She was writing letters and she couldn't get anyone to respond. She spent 80 years writing letters to scientists to try and get them to come out and see her, what she had. And here you can see she's really started to collect a mass amount of bones. And here's all the letters that she was writing and writing and writing. And so finally, she gets someone to show up. And this is in the Black Hills. She gets someone to show up. She's 80 years old. Okay, so finally, 80 years old, they show up, and then they spent like the next, from 79 to 91, they started excavating dinosaur remains, and they brought out many full skeletons that are in museums all around the country and world now. Her grandniece is still living on this farm and collecting bones. But a funny thing happened. I was looking for her her date. I was trying to set a time frame. So she was born in 1898 and she died in 1990. This was in South Dakota. So when I went to look up her death date, talking about spring boards of inquiry, right? Inquiry-based learning, I looked up Ruth Mason, and I found out, that these bones, many of them went to the Black Hills Institute. Well, apparently there's this huge to-do that happened. I can't remember what year it was, but the feds went and took dinosaur bones from this institute because they had excavated them illegally from federal lands. So just kind of funny how one question can lead to another. Next thing you know, you're learning all kinds of interesting things. But here we have, again, some back matter. And so today, Ruth's grandniece owns the ranch. She too collects bones from the land. A triceratops horn sits in her front yard. A piece of Ankylosaurus armor rests in her living room, and the tooth of a Tyrannosaurus Rex perches near the sofa. I think I'd like to go visit her. I think that would be pretty fun to see. So that's Ruth Mason and her dinosaur. And next up, we're going to travel to Cork, Ireland, back in 1789, when Dr. James Barry was born, but was born a girl. So this is Were I Not a Girl, the inspiring and true story of Dr. James Barry. And I have to tell you that my husband's uncle's name is James Barry, so kind of funny. So this story, imagine living at a time when you couldn't be the person you felt you were on the inside. You couldn't be true to yourself. And how often are we hearing about that here and now in today's world? So this is the story of a girl who was born a girl and really wanted to do what men did and wanted to be a man. And so she took full control. But I love also to point out that sometimes in the dedication, there are really neat, interesting things. So I love this, to Ms. Sabatakakis, I'm not sure I said that right, my 8th grade history teacher who facilitated my first deep dives into the past. So shout out to a teacher there. I just wanted to point that out. I love that. So here is that quote that I read to you. This is a story about someone who refused to let that happen, Dr. James Barry. So very interested and curious, wanted to be a soldier, was very interested in medicine, of course, was not allowed to do those things, but she did get an education, and she managed to learn enough to spur her interest in going to school and she wanted to be a doctor. How she yearned to join them, but women could not become doctors. So what did she do? She cut off her hair. She tugged off her stockings, her dress, stays, and chemise, chopped off her red gold curls, and vanished. And suddenly, Dr. James Barry is there. Well, it was James Barry, not quite a doctor yet, had to go to school, but often was harassed and teased because of his slight frame and, delicate skin, but persisted, always fashionable. I love these images, just always, taking a pose and dressing to the nines, but really was quite the proponent of hygiene. So we can all be thankful for Dr. James Barry for pushing us to be more hygienic, both in the hospital and in surgery. And actually, when we get to the back matter, what else did James accomplish? James became a highly skilled surgeon who was a tireless advocate for access to healthcare for women, prisoners, lepers, and the poor. He stirred up conflict wherever he went, usually connected to his activism for hygiene in hospitals and better health care for the disadvantaged. In 1826, he performed the first documented cesarean section in which both the mother and the baby survived. So, round of applause for Dr. James Barry. I think that is super impressive. So pay attention to that back matter. It's often rich in information. Okay, next we have Aurelie is a Dreamer. This is an autobiography, and I just wanted to point out that there is a Spanish version as well, which is always wonderful. I don't speak Spanish, so I will show you the English version. Aurelie Morales is a dreamer, a DACA recipient. And this is just, we have this beautiful jacket. Let me just show you the back as well, because it has this quote, "I could do anything here." Aurelie said to the city sky, "Someday I will." So she is living down in Mexico. And we have an author's note here, which is wonderful to read. Her life changed completely when President Barack Obama enacted the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program. So here she is in Mexico, living with her grandmother, her abuela, chasing chickens and running around with friends and family members. And she has this wonderful home, but her parents are in New York seeking, a better life for her family. But every weekend, the phone would ring and they would talk to Mama and Papa. But they didn't understand. She didn't understand why they were so far apart and had to be far apart. And then the call comes that her brother gets to go. And she doesn't understand that either, but she is excited for him and sad at the same time. She didn't want him to go, but eventually she gets to go as well. She gets the call, but imagine this is this strange man. This is a volunteer who's come to help her cross the border and take her to New York City. She's leaving her grandmother, who she's been with for so long, and that's very hard. And then she has to travel across strange lands and ends up in a city, which is very different than what she's used to. And she's reunited with her parents and her brother, but things are very strange, as you can imagine, difficult. And I love this picture. And again, this use of the gutter, this is kind of showing us this tension that is happening between the two images with the kids here and the kids on this page. So being teased for her language, or her not understanding. And again, this story has really good back matter. On this spread I wanted to show you, again, a very full spread across, and I'm getting some light in here that I'm going to try and fix. Didn't work, but anyways, it's just beautiful illustration there. And a glossary is in the back here. And there's one in the Spanish book as well. Gorgeous book, very heavy and weighty, which I think is nice for a story of that depth. Okay, now we're going to travel as far back in time as we're going to go today, to 1590, when Osnat was born. This is, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Osnat and her dove, the true story of the world's first female rabbi. This is again, we have a jacket, beautiful, and the cover. It's the same on the back, but pay attention to that design because you will see that in the end papers, and you will see it. It's a little bit reversed, but it's that same color, same design. And doesn't this image I just love the colors of this. Almost 500 years ago, when almost everyone believed in miracles, a baby girl was born in the Middle East. Her name was Osnat. Nobody knew it yet, but she would become the first female rabbi in history. And doesn't this just put you there in the night? You can feel it. It's like cool and mysterious. And I just love that illustration. Beautiful colors throughout, telling us about how she lived with her family, surrounded by books. Her father was a rabbi, and so she was educated by her family. She wanted to know how to read. She was inquisitive, wanting to learn. Show me how to read, she begged her father one day. And he said, girls spend their time on chores, reading is for boys. Well, we know how we feel about that. But she said, you don't have any boys. If your daughter wants to learn, why not teach her? And so he did. So pushing those boundaries, being a trailblazer. And here, she loved the shapes of the Hebrew letters. And I love this page showing us part imagination and part of what she's learning. And then this illustration, this page, these two pages, again, here's the gutter and this tree right in the gutter, which showing us this progression as she's growing. So it's a passage of time that we're seeing through the illustrations. So you're reading these words and learning what's happening, but you're reading these images and seeing what's happening. And here she's taking a stand against traditions. One day, Rabbi Barzani returned from a long trip and gazed at his daughter. You look very grown up, he said. Soon it will be time for you to get married. Osnat crossed her arms and objected. If I have a husband, he'll expect me to do chores and I won't have enough time for Torah study. And so he agreed. And the deal was that any young men who came to visit, they couldn't marry his daughter unless they promised to excuse her from doing chores. So 3 chairs for dad there. And I can't read this whole thing, but again, that night sky, that feeling we get, just beautiful. And I wanted to show you, there's an author's note here. Legends and folktales. So folktales tell us that Osnat's father would appear to her in dreams, teaching her how to escape upcoming dangers. Legends found in amulets mention her supernatural abilities, like limiting how many children she had so she could focus on her studies, and freezing an intruder in his tracks by shouting out holy names of God. In recounting her life story, I've drawn on these tales and legends while taking some liberties in imagining how her childhood, marriage, and miracles might have looked. So we all draw on these legends and myths and fairy tales, and here this author has done this as well. How are we doing for time? Oh boy, we're not halfway through. We're gonna get there. Okay. Bringing us forward again into more current times. This is Sharice's Big Voice. A native kid becomes a congresswoman. We have several books today about women who have become congresswomen and representatives for us. I had heard of Sharice Davids, but I didn't really know much about her. So pay attention to the typography and design in this book. We have these lovely kind kind of thought bubbles or speech bubbles that highlight things for us. And these illustrations are just beautiful. So this is kind of connecting past, present, and future in this story. It's very relatable. She's funny. And sometimes we don't know what we might become, right? This is a picture of me and my mom the night I was elected to Congress. When I see this, I think how amazing it is I won. I think how amazing it is I even tried to win. When I was young, I never thought I'd be in Congress, and I never thought I'd be one of the first Native American women in Congress. That's the message we want our kids to hear, right? I never thought I could do it, but I did. Persistence. Pushing those boundaries. And so I love how this is kind of like it's almost a little bit of a graphic novel is coming into play. But Charisse was very much into the martial arts. So she kept that going the whole time. And she loved to talk. She was a talker. She just loved to talk. And so she learned through conversations. And one of her big focuses is listening. So this text is very visually supported by these illustrations here. So I love the idea of us learning through conversations. We need to do more of that today. And here again, we have this idea of the gutter, where she is speaking to her supporters. And she's telling them you deserve to be seen and heard. And very often the theme throughout these books that we're looking at today is that these women, these trailblazers, were women who felt that way or feel that way today, that they not only want to find their own voice to speak up, but they want to speak up on behalf of others, which is just lovely. And so I would encourage you to really spend some time looking at the artist's note, thinking about what this means to this artist to have illustrated this story. We come from generation upon generation of being silenced, being made to conform to a culture that is not our own. And so she really, this was such a fun book for her to be able to illustrate. And we learn about the tribal history of the Ho-Chunk, their language, their clan system, tribal history, and their warrior tradition. And Charisse surely is a modern day warrior. Okay, we're going to go back into the past again and to an inventor. Wood wire wings. Emma Lillian Todd invents an airplane. So she was the first woman to design a successful airplane on her own in 1910. And this is in New York City. So I love if you're into tinkering or you're doing any tinkering in your library or with your students or just at home, this book is all about tinkering, and it's about trying and making mistakes. This is about patents. So she was not allowed to do what she wanted to do. So she got a job typing in the patent office, and that allowed her to view all of these different inventions that were coming to be and work on her own ideas. Failure. She is one who just tried over and over again. Her first models didn't work. They crashed to the ground, as you can see. But she was baffled but buoyed, and I loved that language. And there are quotes throughout this book. The men make fun of the way I construct my models, but they admit that my ideas are all right and that a full-sized airplane built in accordance with those same despised models will fly, which is the principal thing after all, isn't it? So she really was giving them what for. And then another quote here is, "This machine is completed and ready to prove to the world that a woman's machine is quite equal to a man-made flyer and far more practical in some respects than many he has made." Of course, the women's design is more practical. Fun book to read. I didn't know anything about Emma Lillian Todd, so I was glad to read about her. And now we are going to travel to 1794, Italy, Paris, England. And we're going to learn about Secrets of the Sea, the story of Jean Power, revolutionary marine scientist. And I don't know if I put this, I think I might have put it on the form you're going to get. You could pair this one with a book about mapping the, oh yes, How Marie Tharp Revealed the Ocean's Biggest Secret, which is a woman who mapped the ocean floor. That's a really great picture book as well. So it's Jean Power, so forgive me, I said Jean, paving the way for the study of living sea creatures. Oh, look at those end papers. Aren't they beautiful? We know we're going into the water here. Bubbly, bubbly water. So she was very interested in nature, and she would draw and journal. But she really found that she wanted to study living creatures. And so here she is looking out at some lovely ocean creatures. Other naturalists studied the preserved bodies of dead sea creatures, but Jean wanted to study sea creatures as they lived. So what did she do? She built herself an aquarium, so we can thank her for this design of aquarium. She drew it, mapped it out, knew what she was going to do, put it together. All she needed was the creatures. So she went down to the sea where the fishermen were, and they would save things in buckets for her. And she would take them home and put them in the aquarium and watch them. But she was really interested in the paper nautilus. So she collected eggs and she put them in her tank, answering questions through observations, which is just a great way to learn. And these illustrations are so lovely. And so she wanted to know how the shells came to be. She thought maybe they stole them, but she kept watching, and finally she saw the shells, they made them. They started to take shape. So she was so excited about that. And she drew all of these drawings about what she found. She tried to present her findings to academies, but she became their first female member. So she wanted to send her information out to the wider world. So she packed all her belongings and her research onto a boat, and it sank. And she lost everything. But was she deterred? No, she persisted. She started all over. She filled her tank. She collected more specimens, and she persisted. And she presented her information, of course, to doubting men, right? And here, and again, the gutter. Look at her. She's opposing this group of men. And you will see this coming up. We're going to have many more of these pictures of these, a woman sort of facing off a group of men. Love that. So she was very determined. And here, I just love these illustrations about all the things that she loved. It's beautiful. I just went to the Boston Aquarium, so I saw many of these creatures, and I'm very thankful that this was, that she started collecting and learning about these things. And I feel like, can't you see it? Can't you feel it? You can feel her passion. You can feel the beauty of these things. Here is a bit about her life and legacy. I never thought of giving up my business. I armed myself with patience and courage. So I love to see these strong quotes. And there's lots of back matter here for diving into. Okay, now we're going to look at Shirley Chisholm. And these are two fantastic picture books we have on Shirley Chisholm. This one came out, I think, last year. Shirley Chisholm is a verb. I love this book so much. Unbought and unbossed was her slogan. So front matter, thinking about before we get to that book proper, look at this. We have these beautifully set, the typography and design of these words is just fabulous. And then we have the author and illustrator here, and it's like they're coming out of her mouth because she found her voice. I just think that that is a fabulous way of doing that. And the illustrations are wonderful throughout. If you're working on verbs and you want to make a connection with verbs and history and action all through the book, the verbs are highlighted. So pay attention to the typography and design of this book. We've got these postcards here from the places that she lived in her life, a little bit of a graphic novel format, and the popping of those verbs, which really help us to see them. So she was strong. She wanted to be an organizer. And again, here you're going to see this pattern repeated of women who were working behind the scenes, who were making phone calls, writing letters, licking envelopes, stamping them, just doing all the things that needed to keep those men out front, right? But they pushed their way through for us, these trailblazers. I learned, I did not know this about her, that she helped found the WIC and the school lunch program. What a great idea to get kids thinking. If you're using this in your classroom, have your kids research their own school lunch program. What's happening in their cafeteria? How does that get funded? Who's making those decisions about what's served? And you'll hear repeatedly this idea of a seat at a table. So Shirley said, you don't make progress by standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. She said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. I just love that. Yes, we should all have folding chairs in the trunks of our cars, ready to bring out when we need them, right? And here's that gutter again, like we were just talking about, a woman facing those male hands this time. So that gutter is used very well. And along with the verbs are these wonderful adjectives, right? Believable, bright, beautiful. She was awarded a Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama. You see that it looks like it buzzed out a little bit. And I love this because what a poster this would make. So that's the first of the Shirley Chisholm books. We have this other one. This one just came out and I was like, oh my gosh, another one? Could it really be as good as that first one? Yes, it can. Shirley Chisholm, the story of the first Black woman in Congress. It has just these rich illustrations. Just look at those characters come to life. I am just in love with these illustrations. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Look at her family. They'd been moving around and they had sent their daughters off to live with relatives, but they brought them back because they missed them so much. But she was bored in school because when she came here, they said, you don't know the history of the United States. And so they put her in a lower grade. So she was bored. She was restless. She was, flinging elastic bands at kids' heads and making trouble. And I just love the design here of these pages because we have kind of this split. We're in her house and you kind of feel like we're getting the idea of the rooms and the passage of time and things that might be happening around the dining room table. It feels like we're there. And that Shirley is a troublemaker. She wanted to know things. She had questions. Why are only women making cards and decorating boxes, doing all that behind the scenes work? Why should we put up with this? Yeah, echo the other women. Why should we put up with this? That Shirley is a troublemaker. So she decided she was going to change that. She started a child care center where she was a teacher. She started organizing. She helped create the Unity Democratic Club. She organized after-school programs, helped improve housing conditions, voter drives, and then a seat in the New York State Assembly opens, but there's only one problem. It has always, always, always been made up of daring, rebellious, persistent white men. Shirley isn't deterred. During the campaign, words, and more words are thrown at her. Couldn't you be cleaning your house? Have you cooked your husband's breakfast yet? Women ought to take care of their families, not run for office. No, Shirley wants to make something of herself. So she goes on a campaign, the votes come in, and she wins by more than 16,000 votes. Then she runs for Congress, she was a trailblazer. Look at that. Look at that. I mean, what a tough, she was, pardon my French, badass, that woman. Look at her. So 2 very great books that you could have your kids dive into, or you and your family, or you and your adult friends, because picture books are for everyone. Okay, I know we're running out of time here. So another persistent woman, and I'll go through these last ones quick, I guess, because we're running out of time. A seat at the table. Again, we're hearing that term, a seat at the table, and finding your voice. Nancy Pelosi. This is main author, Eliza Boxer. Just wanted to point that out. And notice the end papers here. We talk about the glass ceiling being busted, right? Well, in the Capitol, it's marble, right? So it's the marble ceiling. So this is a story of Nancy growing up in a family of activists and women behind the scenes, writing letters. And her good friend wants her to run. She didn't know, like, what? You want me to run? But she did decide to run. And we know that she is now in the most powerful position in the Senate. So for the House of Representatives. So I'm sorry, going through this very fast, but this is a story of her her life and the many firsts. And I think the illustrations of this are wonderful. And I want you to know that this is Laura Freeman, and the next one we're going to talk about is Kamala Harris, and it's also Laura Freeman. So I wanted to show you that. And I also wanted to point out, like, look at this. This one even includes the insurrection on the Capitol. So really current day information here. And she's wearing a mask. Like, we haven't seen much of that in the picture books, but they're starting to show up. So we have back matter. There's a conversation with Nancy here. Sorry, I'm whipping through this, but I know we're running out of time. So same illustrator. This one is about Kamala Harris, rooted in justice. And this one is told kind of, it's this story, this mother and child who are questioning things. So there's kind of a dual story happening here. But I love the way she shows the passage of time with Kamala growing up, a lotus flower, which is what her name means. And we see that transformation. She grew up going to protest with her family. So one of her first words is freedom, because she's been listening. What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it now? Freedom. So she really started at a very young age. She went to school where she was part of an integration program and got bused to a affluent school. And I feel like this is very relatable for many people, because thinking about that she's the vice president of the United States, it's very familiar. Like, she was doing things, getting on a bus, going to school, going to after school programs, just like kids around here would, baking things and making mistakes. This one, she puts too much salt in. She like mistakenly put salt instead of sugar, but Mrs. Shelton from the daycare center, the after school program, said, oh, maybe a little salty, but very good, encouraging her and not squashing her dreams. And I love this illustration, sorry, where we're seeing she moves and they move to Canada and it's colder. And you can just see like this transformation happening there. She became an activist at a very young age, using that word that she learned so young, going to school, thinking about the people who went before her. And again, we have another transformation here. So really great book about Kamala. This one is about Indelible Anne, larger than life story of Governor Ann Richards, another trailblazer, another woman who persisted. She grew up you know, in the country. I did not want my tombstone to read, she kept a really clean house. I think I'd like them to remember me by saying she opened government to everyone. Yes, bravo. But this, I just had to point this page out to you. In a tiny wooden farmhouse outside a lonely Texas prairie town, a brand new mother paused, weary from labor pains, weary from labor pains that felt like barbed wire and anchor chains. She wrung a chicken's neck from her birthing bed. What? I mean, what? Okay, there's a strong woman. Any surprise that she raised a strong daughter? But really fun illustrations here. If you wanted to talk about parliamentary procedure, they talk about it here. You could do that as an inquiry for inquiry-based learning, but she decided she wanted to get into government. So again, it was women in the background doing all those things. Here she is in those good old hippie days. And she ends up being governor of Texas. And the kind of slogan throughout the whole book is just wait, you'll see, because she just keeps going.
Alison, because we're almost at time here, I'll just note if anyone does need to hop off, that's fine. But because we're recording this session, let's keep going if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how the sun is like beaming in on both of us here as we get along.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we can, because we're recording this session, I think we can just keep going. And
Okay.
yeah, if anyone needs it, they can come back and reference the video.
Okay. Well, bye to anyone who was with us and is now leaving, but we'll keep going. So this book is called Shaped by Her Hands, Potter Maria Martinez. And this is a really interesting story. This is, sorry, I've gone through my notes here, in New Mexico. It also takes us through New York, San Francisco, and Chicago. And I love the end papers because we're talking about the Black pottery that she was known for. I love the soft, warm colors that we get to see. They bring us to the Rio Grande and this river. And I love kind of this perspective we get here of her looking out across that. She grew up surrounded by clay. It was in the earth under her deerskin untos, in the thick adobe walls of her Pueblo home, and in the large jars that held her water gathered from the nearby Rio Grande. So she was making pots. They always broke. She got frustrated, but she learned how to fire pots and make them last. But the whole time it's through her heritage and these traditions being kept alive. And I love this kind of rivery flow throughout the illustrations. And this idea of these traditions that are passed on from generations. So her big thing was sharing her knowledge once she learned how to make these beautiful pots. So they fired them in the, they smothered the fire to keep the smoke in, and that's how they got those black pots. And she became famous for these black pots. And then they were painted and sold. And she taught her children. Her husband was involved. She went around the world showing people. And there's really great back matter on this book too. So we have politicians, scientists, inventors, artists, rebellious people. Lizzie demands a seat. This is a book, like, I think many of us know the story of Rosa Parks and might even be familiar with the story of Claudette Colvin. Well, you could start with Lizzie demands a seat and then connect all three of those, and what a great journey you'd go on by looking at all three of these. So this one has great back matter to tell us about the story, like a lot, and we'll get to that. So, and also the front matter, we have this one signed, and the author quoted Gandhi, which was very interesting. Be the change that you wish to see in the world. Really nice watercolor illustrations here. So Lizzie wanted to get on the trolley, and the conductor said, "No, you're not allowed." And she said, "Well, I am allowed, because really the rules only said that you had to be civil and respectable. But, you know, they didn't want to have blacks on the trolley." But she said, "I'm going to get on that." So rejected, restricted, and refused, she stood firm. Born free, but what did that mean? So she was a free slave, you know, she had been freed, her family was free, but she still was not living free. Literally, they shoved her off the trolley. She was brave, she had guts and determination, and they literally assaulted her when she tried to stay on. But she got back up and she got on, and she refused. She just grabbed hold. And the conductor said, "Well, I'm going to find a police officer, and that'll be the end of that." They did find a police officer, and she was pulled off. However, there was a witness. So this gentleman came and said, "I saw what happened. Here's my name if you need a witness." And that planted a seed for her, an idea. What is a witness? What does that mean? And so she took that to heart, and she began to think about the courtroom, think about meetings and going petitions, and she took her case to court. And so I know I'm running out of time, but she really fought hard to be heard before the court, and then won. And city after city, decade after decade, for a century, fighting for the right to ride. And so taking this progression through those three stories would be really fantastic. So in 1991, 4 sixth grade girls in New York City learned about Elizabeth Jennings and petitioned. So they're doing the same thing she was doing. They petitioned their city council to name the corner where she boarded the streetcar in her honor. They were unsuccessful, but in 2007, a group of 3rd and 4th grade students from Public School 361 in New York City again sought to honor Elizabeth Jennings. After a year of petitioning their city council and attending council meetings, they were successful. So they learned from her, and they followed in her footsteps, persisting and doing, you know, getting petitions going. And so I love to see young people take action like this. Here's a book that we have talked about before with IRW, so I won't go into great detail on this one. This is Gary Schmidt, who is an author we've been working with for years, and Daniel Minter, who is from Portland and co-founder of the Indigo Arts Alliance. Look that up. Great resource for children's literature. And this is Sojourner Truth's Long Walk Toward Freedom. I just will show you a few of these illustrations. So, and I'll read the first page because it's amazing. You can see the 2 pages. This is the way it is often through the book. In slavery time, when hope was a seed waiting to be planted, Isabella lived in a cellar where the windows never let the sun in and the floorboards never kept the water out. She had 10 or 12 brothers and sisters. She couldn't be sure, since almost all of them were sold as slaves before she was old enough to remember. The illustrations are gorgeous throughout the book, haunting often. I think they did a great job with her story. That one is well worth grabbing to put on your shelf. And now we will take a leap down to Saving American Beach. I didn't know anything about this woman until I read this picture book, the biography of African-American environmentalist Mayvini Betch. And so she loved the beach. You can see front matter, these beautiful illustrations. As a girl, she loved the beach. She loved the whoosh of its waves, the blue sky. But being Black, she couldn't go to any beach. And here we go with the gutter. And here's this rope separating the white from the colored. And she didn't think that was right. So she took action She started to do all those things we know that women were doing. She was a singer. She was an opera singer. And so she really, I think, lived and breathed music and the ocean. They had the beach. A gentleman bought it, and so made it so that Black people could go to the beach, but it was really for all people. But then it got neglected, and she didn't like that, so she became an environmentalist. She cleaned up the beach on herself, and was a real activist. And she grew her wonderful hair out, which she decorated with shells and buttons. And she was just a real artistic protester. So these are the last two. How could we not talk about RBG, right? I mean, oh, we're all brokenhearted. She's no longer with us. But we have this one, We the People. Ruth Objects. I love that, Ruth Objects. And then we have I Dissent. Both of them are really wonderful picture books. Women will have achieved true equality when men share with them the responsibility of bringing up the next generation. So she was a trailblazer, as many of you know. I'll just show you there's different ways of depicting her life. Like, these are very lovely illustrations. And we know she worked very hard. She was more of quiet and persistent. We know she was very vocal when she got to the Supreme Court and did all her work there. But she was more of, you put your nose to the grind and do it. But she really did object quite a bit. She fought very hard. So here we have a very different way of illustrating about her life, and I love this. Disagreement, unfairness with inequality. She dissented, she objected, she resisted. Disagreeable? No. Determined? Yes. And I think that really kind of sums up who she was. Here she is. She wasn't good in the kitchen. She just failed, but thankfully she married a very nice man, Martin, who was a good cook, loved to cook. And so family dinners were always cooked by Martin. And there's great back matter in this one too. So here it also talks a little bit about her relationship with Scalia, because they were really good friends, even though they disagreed fiercely. Okay, we've gone over by about 15 minutes, but you will be getting a copy of something that looks like this, that has all of those books we talked about today. So you will have the titles and the author, illustrator, and all that information. Can we, let's see, if I do view, can I see everybody? Is it just Norma? Norma's the only one left. Well, that's a wrap. So
yeah, thank you so much for taking us through this picture book showcase. This was such a great way to celebrate International Women's Day today, and those themes of challenging the status quo and persisting and having big ideas and all this wonderful bold typography and focus on words. I think that was a great collection to take us through. So I know Alison just mentioned that you'll all get the show notes in your email after this with links and resources, and I hope that you will all come back for another IRW Presents program. You can find that on our website, islandreadersandwriters.org/upcoming for events. And I will note that our podcast is also returning in late March, so be on the lookout for that as well. And if you have questions or comments about this program or any other program, our inbox is always open. So please do shoot us a message or respond to that email that you'll get tomorrow. That's a direct link to me, and you'll get a little survey, a little 10-second survey in there as well if you want to drop us a comment.
And if there's anyone who wants to stay on after to look at a book in more detail, I'm happy to stay. Just turn your video on. You can maybe stop recording, Kelsey, if we have that conversation. But yeah.